Live with Women on the Stand. See if this is working. Sometimes it's finicky. I see your request, which is awesome.
Hi.
There we go. It worked. Yay.
We're here.
We're here. Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this with me. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Awesome. So I do these on Instagram and also through my YouTube as well. So those of you who are on YouTube, I have wonderful, remind me your name. I'm so sorry.
It's okay, Amy.
Amy, thank you. I just know he was Women on the Stand.
I know. I was actually thinking the same thing. I was like, wait, do I know her first name?
Yeah, Emily. So,
Emily, that's right. Thank
awesome.
you.
You're good. So those of you who are on YouTube, unfortunately, I can't share the screen that way yet. I haven't quite figured out the technology there. So if you're on YouTube, you just see my face. But this is Amy. Go check out Women on the Stand. You'll see her lovely face there, and you'll get to hear her voice as we chat. So thanks again for being here.
I'm really happy to be.
Awesome. Well, I have loved your account for pretty much since you ever had it pop up. It's been a wonderful resource. And so when I started this series of just wanting to talk with more of the women out there, I feel like I get to connect with these different accounts and sort of see what people are putting out there. And I love having that interaction. But I was like, I would love to be able to have conversations face to face with those people. And I'm kind of spoiled because I live here in Utah. So there's a lot of them that I do get to interact with and I do get to connect with. But I know there's a lot of other women who are like, I would love if we could have more of those conversations and connect more. So that was kind of my thought and idea was well, what if every Friday I just hopped on and got to meet somebody and we got to just chat about kind of whatever came up and whatever was on our hearts and minds that day. And so thanks for being the first one to kick it off with me.
This is really great. And I don't live in Utah, so I feel that, right? Where I feel sometimes disconnected from the people that I see online that are saying really smart things. And so I'm really happy to be here with you.
Awesome. Cool. Well, for those who might be unfamiliar with your account, do you want to tell a little bit about what it is and kind of how it started? And yeah.
Sure. So my account started, the impetus was in my area, we'd had this long practice of having women on the stand. So women in leadership on the stand in state conferences and ward conferences, and even sometimes depending on the ward and sacrament meetings. And then, and it happens not just in my area, but it still happens in many places in the church.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, our area president decided to take us off. And it was really crushing to me, heartbreaking, because I knew how important visibility is and representation, and not just because for women to be seen. In fact, that's the least part of it. In some ways, it's more important for us to be seen by others, but it's important because it helps us be balanced and united, and it helps us be able to speak up in councils, and it helps us recognize the importance of all that the feminine brings to our church life, right? And to the governing of our church life and to the decision making of our church life. So in a nutshell, that's how it started. And now, I talk about all things, LDS and at the intersection of women's experience in the church.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I love that. I think it's so fascinating and interesting just in general, thinking about our church and kind of the structure of it and some of the ideals of it and some of the practical applications of it. This idea that's kind of different from a lot of other mainstream Christian churches in that it's volunteer-based run, right? Versus this is your job and your occupation and your main focus. And so this whole idea of you can get sort of that different experience in different places. And yet there is also still this official formal structure and organization, and trying to balance those different pieces, I think is my business brain who loves studying businesses and logistics and all of those different things is oh, that's so fascinating to look at an organizational structure like this of trying to figure that out. And I think it's extra interesting being a participant in it and trying to recognize how depending upon what leadership you get there, can really change the experience that you have, and also the role that that sort of official leadership has in setting the tone and setting the expectation, even setting the standard of like what is it that each of these individual places is supposed to be focusing on. And so that communication back and forth between like leadership holding that position, and to me that's a big part of like what the role and structure of having like an official leadership there is, to say, hey, this is kind of the standard, this is what we're focusing on, this is sort of the vision and goal, but that feedback should also be coming from the individuals who are in it and who are living it, and being like, this is what we need, this is what we're looking for, this is what is helpful. And I think we're figuring out, how do we have that dialogue, how do we connect in that way, right?
Yeah, I think that's really smart. I think it's easy to get upset when things go wrong in the structuring, right? Or within the structure, right? Like sometimes it's an imperfect structure, right? I mean, it is a church in restoration, right? We are a living church. That means things change and have changed and will continue to change all the time. And that feedback is really important, right? I mean, that's part of it. And that is, and also I think that what you're saying about, not just about, there's a standard, but there's an interpretation of the standard too that gets trickled down, right? And so, you're saying depending on leadership, but also sort of depending on the needs of your area. And I think that's what's hard sometimes when decisions get made, often without talking to women, right? Because there's not, at sort of in the upper echelons, yes, there are women. The way that the system works is not really, it doesn't help the men in charge either. Find that balance, because there's no I'm sorry, my dog is driving me crazy. Hang on 1 second.
You're good. I love it. While you're dealing with him, I'll just say, like,
so sorry, I was not going to be able to keep concentrating. So anyway, so I guess the question becomes, how are we able to react in our own parts of the vineyard for the needs of the people that live here? That might be different than even the needs of like this huge area of like the West Coast, right? Where this decision was made for like the whole West Coast. Well, might be different in Washington State than it is in the Bay Area than it is, and so like how much leeway does leadership have to really meet needs at a local level? So there's some questions in there that should be explored and examined.
Yeah. Well, and I love, I can only imagine how difficult and hard that had to be in your experience, and to be like, this was something going on, and then all of a sudden it's just gone. And it's like, what? We're used to this. And like, it had such value and meaning, and acknowledging how hard that can be. And I'm over here like observing this experience that's happening somewhere else. And I'm so grateful in a way that it occurred, because it brought to light these conversations, these questions, these ideas. And to me, that's another key part of this, is like, we need to be having a greater awareness. I feel like there's been almost this like phantom limb, or like invisible thing that has been existing. And we're all sort of starting to realize, like, wait, this is a phantom limb here. Like, what would it be if we actually had the full other arm here? What would that experience look like and feel like? And I think we're just barely starting to understand all the different places and areas of like, oh, wait, something could be missing here. Something is missing here. Something is missing there. What more could we be experiencing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it, right? It's awareness. Right. I mean, I think that sometimes people think it's about griping, or it's about, being dissatisfied. And I'm not saying that sometimes there isn't dissatisfaction. That is often a part of people's experience, and that's okay. You can feel upset. You can feel dissatisfied. You can feel all those feelings are fine, but and they're even good. But that's not what it's all about. Right? That's part of the picture. And the bigger picture is really just about having this transparency and this awareness, and this just asking for conversation that is transparent, and asking for feedback and models of ways to provide feedback at the levels of church governance that sometimes we don't have access to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that you said that too, because I think of the analogy of like the body to Christ. And that is like one I use all the time. And so in our physical bodies, like when we have pain there, it's not like a bad thing. We actually really want that pain because it lets us know, hey, something's not quite right here. Something is off in this experience. What can we do to help resolve that and bring it back into a greater bit of alignment? And so learning to see these experiences and validating whatever, on an individual level in, a specific ward or branch or area, like there's a significant pain here happening. What is that trying to let us know about how do we align our human experience, our human interpretation, our human ability to try and operate this divine principle and structure and goal, and how do we learn to blend those better? So I love that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Cool. And it's interesting too, because it makes me think as well of like, I'm so grateful as well for the women who have brought up a lot of these ideas, because it was never something on my mind or in my radar. I wasn't having a lot of painful experiences firsthand until I was. And it wasn't even because I started interacting with women. I think that's another way it can go, is like, oh, that's a dangerous woman because she's talking about this stuff. And then all of a sudden you're going to start feeling the same way, and you're going to start having all of this like angst and anger and stuff come up. And it wasn't even that I started having these negative experiences that I wasn't before. It was I was starting to understand experiences I had had, but I didn't fully allow myself to experience. And it really paralleled a lot of my experiences with giving birth to my kids too, actually, where I didn't realize some of the trauma I had gone through in like when I was delivering my first, the position they were wanting me to push in was not working for my body, and it was causing so much pain. And I kept wanting to be like, this is not right. This does not feel good. But I didn't know. And it sounds dumb. I didn't think that I could say that, right? Because it was like, oh, my doctor's here. My doctor knows the best thing. I'm a new mom. I don't know what I'm doing. And finally, I got in this place where a thought came to my mind from a workshop I had done before preparing for my birth. And my teacher specifically there in that moment, she'd been teaching us some breathing exercises. And she was like, your torso is smaller. So you need to do this breathing exercise in a different position because it's not going to work for you. And that thought came back to my mind. And I was like, oh, my torso's smaller. I moved and adjusted my body, and he came. And so it was that beautiful moment of like, getting to see, I was so grateful I had doctors there. They knew and understood, like, here's some important things. They're trying to help. I really like loved my doctor. I don't have any hard feelings against them. And at the same time, that doctor had not been the personal one I had been working with as much, who knew my body, who knew these different things. I had had somebody who had had that place and had given me access to that knowledge of what I needed, so that in the moment I was able to call upon that and use that. And so it really paralleled. As I started having other kids, I learned like, oh, I know my body and I know what it needs and I know the positions and I know what I like. And then by the time I had my fourth birth, I had like all of the people, my medical team, well-trained. They knew what I liked. They knew what I struggled with. My husband knew his role, his jobs. Like, I'm expecting this. I need help in this area. And it was the most magical birth for that fourth one, because everybody kind of knew their roles, knew what was going on. We could have this beautiful dialogue and conversation. And I think about my church experience, and it feels so similar to that, where I had women who started telling me these different experiences that is like, this is how you give birth, or this is what your body is designed to do, or this is what this is. But it was more of like, here's what your spiritual leadership looks like. Here's what your role in the church looks like. Here's these different thoughts and experiences. And I started seeing things like, oh, I understand now why I was so mad. I didn't fully let myself feel anger, but it was the closest I've ever felt to feeling anger was when my cousin was getting to go through the temple because he was going on a mission. And I was going to have to wait because the ages were still a lot further apart. And so it was going to be like 3 more years before I could go through the temple because I was serving a mission or because I was going to get married if I got married in that time frame. And I just remember being like, I'm so much more spiritual than him. Like, I can totally go through the temple. Why can I not go through? And he can. And that was like the first time I really felt some of that dissonance in like, where is my spiritual support? Where is my structure for cultivating my spiritual experience? And then I started having conversations with my grandpa, who has had like almost every local calling you can have in the church, from bishop to stake president to even patriarch. And I would hear these stories of him talking about having spiritual experiences and training, and like, this person came and told him about, he was giving a blessing or whatever, like just these details going on. And I was like, I've never had experiences of getting to interact with other women and being like, this is how you feel the spirit. This is how you make decisions based on the spirit. This is how you learn. Like, everything felt like I had been discovering it on my own. And all of a sudden there was this craving and this like, what would that be like? And women just started showing up and started having that experience of like, well, this is how I've learned to feel the spirit. This is how I've had. And I feel like I knew how to feel the spirit beforehand, but so maybe that's not even quite the right word, but it's just like this spiritual leadership, I guess. And I started having mentoring show up from these women who had been on this path before. So long story, but I don't know if that sets the stage a little bit.
I love it. And I actually really want to point back to something that you said that I think is really important. So when you were talking about your birth story, and you knew yourself, right? You were really obviously an integral part in that process. And your doctors and your nurses and all the people and your husband, all important parts. And your story of where you say, I didn't know the first time, but then I was able to provide feedback. And I was able to help them understand what was going to be best and how we were going to make this process go well, and how beautiful by the fourth birth it was. Well, here's the thing. It was better for everybody, not just for you. And that's the thing that we think about partnership. Sometimes in the church or in sort of any patriarchal structure, we think like partnership is something that we are doing for women, and that is not true. Partnership is something that we do for the body of Christ. Partnership is something that we do to make everybody's job more effective, everyone's experience better. That's what partnership is for. So I love that story because it really illustrates so well the purpose of, this partnership that we're supposed to be striving for in church. And so I think that's, and then what you're saying about, women in like, who are your, mentors in the church, that matriarchal bond is really important, because we have such a heavy patriarchal bond, and it's important too. The patriarchal sort of side of it's just so overdeveloped in some ways, right? In our psyches, right? Because it's just the water that we swim in, and not just in the church, just sort of in the greater culture, right? Yeah. And so when we really develop these strong matriarchal bonds, and we understand, and I'm thinking, not just women to women, but like women and men, right? When men seek those that matriarchal understanding too, right? So when I look at all of this, it's just like you said, I love that sort of phantom limb imagery that you were talking about before. It's about wholeness.
Yeah.
Right. And there's such beauty in that seeking for wholeness, which we will never find complete wholeness in this earth, right? In this timeline, but we should seek more of it.
Yeah.
Right. And so like whenever somebody talks about like that seeking of perfection, they just think, no, it's not really perfection we're looking for. It's just more wholeness and balance. Yeah. And that's the momentum that I'm interested in sort of, being a part of.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, I love that so much. To me, that's like part of the beauty of the idea of a living church too, right? Is that continual progression towards it, that we're always expanding, that there's always new ways that we can incorporate that. My husband and I have been starting some businesses lately, and it's been so fun to have this experience of like tag teaming between like work tasks and kid tasks and home tasks. And it's taken a lot of work to get us into a place where we both have the skills and the understanding and we know each other needs and we've learned how to communicate. But now that we've been through all of that hard work, it's so fun to just like tag team. Okay, dad's in charge, mom's in charge now. You're doing this, I'm doing this. And that, like, as I was driving this morning, I was like, how fun would that relationship and experience and dynamic be within like a ward setting where you really felt like we can totally have this tag team thing of people are doing things and having these different activities. And that just feeling gave me an idea of like, oh, that's the feeling I want to look for. That's the feeling that I'm trying to find, that I'm trying to create, that I want to focus on.
And the thing is, it's possible. Right? I mean, that's what, it's not impossible. The structure that we live in it makes it that there's obstacles to overcome to get there.
Yeah.
Right? But that doesn't mean that it's impossible to achieve, even in the current structure, even right now, right? Yes. Even if nothing were to change, with thoughtful leadership, with people who understand that it's not about, oh, I'm offering something to women, I am actually receiving as well, and that it's gonna, I mean, that is possible, and I've experienced that. I think that's part of why I'm so passionate about collaborative partnership in our wards and stakes, because I've experienced it and I know it's possible. I really do. And so when something, and I think, when outside forces, come in and disrupt that possibility and make it harder, it becomes frustrating for me. And like you said before, I'm upset that it happened, but really it did give me the impetus of saying, like, look, we just need to be talking about this. It's not some secret.
Yes.
It shouldn't be, secret that this ward does something a little bit different than this ward because they need something different, right? Or that, hey, here's what we do in our ward that has really been beneficial to united leadership and collaborative partnership and has really made our ward happier and everyone is more fulfilled and we are sturdy in our foundations, right? Those are things that we should be talking about openly and not worried that somebody's going to find out and shut it down, right? Or somebody's going to, and, especially when they're really within everyone. I think that not everyone, I shouldn't use, I like using words that are like, oh, this is how it is, but I shouldn't. But I think sometimes we think, that the handbook is this like really clear document. And for some things it really is. And for many things it's really not, right? I believe on purpose it leaves a lot of room for interpretation for local leadership.
Yeah.
And so when we think that way, right, that gives us we get curious about what we can do within the realms of what's possible today, not like trying to cheat any system, but trying to work within a system and be creative within a system to meet the needs of the people that we serve. Yeah. And I think I think that it's structured that way so that we can do that. Now, obviously not everyone thinks that, but I think that there's I don't think it's crazy to think that by the way some of the wording is structured, or some of the things that, are not just spelled out like do this by these like these real sort of cumbersome steps. It's not like that and everything. Yeah. And it's a document that changes and is now even set up in a way that can be easily changed and that we all have access to. So I don't think that we need to be I think that we're often afraid to be like, well, it doesn't say exactly that in the handbook. It's like, okay, well, what doesn't it say? Let's breathe a little bit. Let's see what space there is to serve the people that we're trying to serve. So, yeah.
Oh, I love that so much. And I want to touch on one of the things you said, because I have never had more empathy for church leadership unexpectedly than I gained through trying to start and grow a business. Because in having a business, all of a sudden I had this responsibility to run different people who are on the team, managing them and like trying to communicate, here's my vision, here's my goal. And even as I was like creating different content or materials or resources that I do, because I'm a spiritual life coach. So I teach a lot of different methods and things that I've created to help people. And in trying to like communicate that, it's like, I have my vision and I'm like, I want it this way. And this is what it's supposed to look like. And this is how it's supposed to happen. And somebody else will come in and have a completely different idea or a different understanding. And so, and it's not unique to this space, right? But I love bringing that experience up because it just helps me remember. And I kind of hate the phrase because we use it a lot and it's more of a justification. I feel like a negative interpretation of like, well, leaders are humans too, in a way. But when I put it in the perspective of like, they have their different thoughts, and it's like a collection of people here who are having experiences as the result of the church, and a collection of people here who are trying to figure out how to lead and manage it and have their own thoughts and their own emotions and their own experiences and their own perspectives, let alone our own individual direction of all of us trying to kind of figure out what do we feel we're supposed to be doing. What do you do when what you feel like God is directing you to do is in conflict with what somebody else is feeling, and how to navigate those things. And so for me, it's been super helpful to use the perspective of like, there's the human experience or human perspective and the divine perspective. And so I look at like what happened with you guys and I go, on the human experience, like validating how hard that was and the difficulties there and what it felt, and kind of seeing that. And from like a divine perspective, I can totally hold space for God, like specifically directing. I know this person who's over this area cares about this thing, is going to be upset about it if I say like, I need you to go in and shut this down. Whether that's literally the words or intention God has, I'm not going to assume what God is saying or doing. But for me, I love to play with the idea of like, what if God knew the effects of that and that humanness and how it was going to help bring out this part in our relationship together, and whether we want to assign that to God or not, it just creates this space for God to be involved in the process. And for me to get out of a perspective that feels very antagonistic or limited, or one is wrong and one is receiving inspiration and the other isn't. And it's like, God knows all of us, knows what we think, what we feel, where we're going, and knows how to get us where we need to go using those natural tendencies and desires, and can really bring goodness from that experience. And so I think when you're talking about that idea too of working within the system right now, that idea again can be like, we have to find the loopholes and we have to find the whatever. But I take it back to like my experience with my husband again, of like, I have goals and dreams of like, this is the person I want him to become and the relationship I want us to be at. And where are we right now? How can I love him as he is right now? How can I show up as myself? How can I support him as he is? And viewing it from that space of like, there's so much here. There's so much available. And it doesn't have to be, we're trying to work around it. It's, we're trying to kind of honor where we are. And then it gets to turn in, for me, instead of being in a space of like, I'm against church leadership or I'm finding a way around it, it becomes almost this like love story dynamic of, I see you, I respect you, I know where you are, and let's find a new way to play together. Let's get creative in this. Let's mix it up. Let's find new relationships. And so I'd love to hear if you want to share some of what you've experienced before. You're mentioning it's entirely possible. If you feel comfortable with any dynamic or stories, just to kind of paint that picture a little bit. And then we also had a question from a awesome guy on here who is like, in fact, let me see if I can still read it. Yeah. Question for you both, if that's okay. I'm wanting to learn how to be a better ally for women in the church and teach our youth and fellow men the same. What could we as men do to be more supportive? So I thought that could be a great thing if you want to tie in any thoughts with that as well.
Sure. So I'm going to take it. I don't remember all the things that you asked. Sorry,
You're good.
But as far as one thing I want to mention about what you were talking about before is that when you say like, oh, like it's not about finding the loopholes, I totally agree. It's about finding the space where inspiration can be breathed into, right? Yeah. Like it's not about a loophole. It's about creativity. It's about thoughtfulness. It's about inspiration. It's about finding the space where the Spirit can speak to you as a leader and as a counsel and as a collaborative unit, right? As a team. And so I think that's really that's an important distinction, because it's not about like what loophole it's about, hey, where's the room for inspiration? Where's the room for the Spirit to guide?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important distinction. So I just want to say that. As far as allyship, which is such an important part of partnership, right? They're different, but sort of they're companions in this, right? Because sometimes at church, what I'm seeking, the partnership is good for both of us, right? Like that unity. If I'm on a council at church, it's going to go, like we were all saying before, right? We were both saying before that it's going to be better. It's going to be more beautiful for everybody if we find that partnership, because what I have to say might help you, and what you have to say might help with me with my stewardship, and vice versa. And really, we're just serving the same thing, right? In this sort of healthy ward or healthy stake, healthy church. And so I think it's this mutually beneficial, like equally yoked in vision that I hope that men can understand. Like, I guess that what I would say to, who is it, Ben? That would be to sort of help spread that vision of, it's not about, this thing that we are helping women do. It's not this like nice thing for women. Partnership is not a nice thing for women. It's a mutually beneficial thing for the whole church and for everybody involved. And then I think that the other part of it is that allyship, where when you have a moment too, when there's like a moment where you have where you can use your voice to go to bat for a woman in a council meeting, in any situation, where you're just saying like, oh, I don't really want to, that guy's a little bit higher than me in church governance, so it would be kind of awkward if I just use your voice, right? Use your voice in allyship. Let women lead, and then take action depending on what they're signaling to you in their leadership and in your allyship, right? Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes I think of like, oh, there's this concession I made for women. No, that's not. I just think that it's just sort of a mindset shift that we need. Yeah. And I think that that's in the greater culture too. So I wouldn't limit that to the church. But I'm sorry. And then what was your other question for me?
If you just have an example, like, is there something that comes to mind of like when partnership or when allyship showed up, just so people have an idea of like, I'm just so grateful for women who have like had these experiences of like, look, it's entirely possible. This is what it looks like, because it's like, oh, okay, I have a better idea or a better feel of what is it I'm trying to gain. The same way I love learning from older couples, like, how did you navigate this in your relationship? What does that look like? So if you have any experiences or thoughts or things that come to mind of either of those.
I do. So a few years ago, was just after, it was like we were all coming back to church after the quarantine, and my husband had been in the bishopric, and I had been in the Relief Society presidency during the whole time. And I was exhausted. He was exhausted. He was about to get released. The 5 years was up. And I said to the bishop at the time, release me. I just need a break. I just want a little break. I'll just like quietly go into a corner for a minute. That never works at church. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know why I thought that would work. But anyway, the new bishop gets called, and he asks me to be the young women's president. And I say, no, I've already been the young women's president like 4 years before this. I was young women's president. I've been in leadership for so long. I don't want to do this. And then he gave me his reasons why he felt spiritually prompted and thought that I was the right person for the job, and asked me to pray about it. And so I said, of course. And I did. And it was a really strong answer that I knew I should do it, but I knew I should only do, and it was like this crazy experience where the answer was, yes, Amy, you have to do this. And you only have to do it for a year. And I was like, I don't know why I'm only going to have to do it for a year, but I know I'm only going to have to do it for a year. So I just said yes. I didn't say it's only going to be a year, but I said yes. And I said, but Bishop, here's the thing. Our stake had this really great practice over the it had been like 6 or 7 years at this point, where they'd had women on the stand at state conferences and ward conferences, and some units in our state had had a woman on the stand during sacrament meeting. And I had been in contact with many young women about this subject, and they all wanted to see that. And I said, and it was never the men in charge who didn't want it to happen. They were trying to get it to happen. It was always the women who were in positions where that would require them to be on the stand that they didn't want to do it. So it would just get shut down and shut down. And I kept on trying to, anyway, it was a long story. But at that point I said, in my prayers, I felt this prompting to say, ask this bishop, this new bishop who you don't even know very well, if he will prioritize that practice and find a creative way, a creative solution, and inspiration for the women who would be impacted by that. And so I said that when I accepted the calling, and he right away said, yes, absolutely. Let's figure this out together. We're going to make this happen. And it was like that. We had this collaborative partnership. It wasn't like, I didn't feel, sometimes he would come back and say, this is why this can't happen. I would say, oh yeah, I totally get it. I understand that. How about this? What are we thinking about this? And in the end, we found the solution with the women, the other 2 women that would have been involved, and with the other parts of the ward council, where we would just rotate. 1 month it would be the young women's president on the stand, 1 month would be the primary president on the stand, and 1 month it would be the reciting president on the stand. And it just sort of worked for everybody. And so I just think that it was allyship, because he was willing to go to bat for me, right? He was willing to say, like, I understand why this is important. I understand why it's important to our young women and to many women in our ward, even if it's not important to these other 2 women you're asking to sit on the stand. And so, yeah, I think that's a great example of both partnership and allyship.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it. It makes me think, too, of how I've appreciated the space of, like, actually, that thought just completely left my mind. So I'm like, oh, no, there we go. That's what it is. So the pushback that sometimes happens with things of like, no, this is why we can't do it. I love that you said there was this dynamic and you found a way to work it out, because I totally got in a space in my marriage too, where like my husband would push back on something. And I was like, no, you're just not seeing, like, I need your help with the kids, or like, I need your help in whatever. And when I stopped seeing that pushback as like a negative thing, or trying to like put me in, like, put all the responsibility on me, that was in my marriage dynamic. In the church relationship, it would be of like taking away that responsibility, right? But instead see it as like, okay, this is feedback on finding what is the best thing that's going to work for us right now. Everything changed. I had more grace for me. I had more grace for him. And we did always find, like, always come up with solutions that worked for him and worked for me. And there was a little bit of like humbling I had to go through, of like letting go of, no, I want it this way and it has to be this way. And if it's not this way, then it's wrong. And here's my reasons why it's not wrong. And you should be doing it this way, and you should care about it as much as I do. And instead focus on, okay, I want that partnership. I want that connection. And it created space for him where he was like, thank you. I appreciate that you're feeling this respect for me as well. And it made him want to naturally show up for me more. And so I haven't had as many of those experiences in church leadership experiences, but as you were talking, I just saw that same parallel. And I've heard that again and again from women, of like, when you're viewing it from that space of, you took that initiative, like, I feel this thing, I want to make sure I'm communicating and I'm holding this, but then also seeing like, okay, I'm willing to work with you. And when we get into that, like, we're working together mindset, that's where I see so much changes in those dynamics. And it really opens up a lot of doors for those types of experiences that you shared.
I think that's beautiful. And I think it's a really important point, right? It's not that there's not friction, and friction is not bad, right? Ooh. And it's friction is the thing that's going to keep us moving forward, right? Ooh. Without friction, it's like we're going nowhere, right? Someone's just taking the reins, and who knows where we're going. And but in collaboration and partnership, there's going to be back and forth. There's going to be disagreement. There's going to be different ideas, and maybe nobody gets exactly what they want, and maybe that's the best outcome sometimes. And sometimes in real collaboration. I mean, I know in my teams at work, I've had really healthy teams and really dysfunctional teams at work, right? Yes. And the really healthy teams at work and the really healthy board councils operate in the same way, right? It's that everyone's hearing the voices of all the participants. Everyone respects the stewardship and the responsibilities of the person that's on that team, of each individual on the team, and understanding that sometimes we're going to disagree, and sometimes I'm going to have to like come into a conversation having an idea that I think is the most wonderful idea, and then here's some practicalities from a different team member that I didn't quite understand because I don't understand their job like I understand my own job, right? And that's the same thing in a ward council, is that I understand what's really great for my stewardship and really important for my stewardship, and everybody on that council understands their stewardship, and so we have to be able to come together and lean into some of the friction sometimes. And lean into some of and just help each other understand, and then come to a place where, it's not about like, oh, everyone's got everything that they wanted. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes, you'll come and say, well, here's this actual reason why we need to do that. And everyone's, oh, yeah. I didn't understand it that way. Yep, let's do your thing. And sometimes you come into a council and you say, well, here's what I really think should happen. And people say, but what about this? And you, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. And let's do your thing. Right. And sometimes it's a real mishmash of both things. And I think that's what it is. It's like a dynamic experience, and there's going to be tension, and there's going to be friction. And of course there should be, right? Oh. And I mean, it doesn't mean that there's contention. Yeah. There's just going to be different points of view and different voices that all need to be considered. And so I think that sometimes we don't have the right mindset when we're talking about partnership, when we're talking about collaboration, when we're talking about united leadership, especially when we're talking about inclusion for women and women's voices and disability and understanding of women's labor and all of the labor that women do that goes so unseen. It becomes a thing that we think that the men in the group that have all this power that we don't have. We have influence, but we don't really have decision-making power. And I think it's really important to name that. Yeah. Right? And collaborative and thoughtful leadership understands that and welcomes the decision-making from women, right? Wants them at the decision-making table. Yes. Wants us to be collaborative in that decision-making. And so I just think it's important to remember that it's not just about like avoiding or one person gets all the thing. It's like, no, there's going to be tension, and that's healthy.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you. It makes me think too here of kind of going back to Ben's question and like, what would I respond to with that? I would say one of the things I found myself craving is kind of like what you were saying too. There's definitely something of like women speaking up and saying like, hey, I have these ideas and I have these thoughts and how can we do this, and how like wonderful it feels to have a man come and be like, hey, what thoughts do you have? What things are here? What is the, do you have anything that you want to share that you feel like you can't say? Like, again, I'm always going back to my relationship with my husband, where it's like, yeah, I had to go through the process of learning to be like, I could ask for help. And it sounds so dumb, but like when we were first married, it was just like, I didn't even feel like I could ask for help. And so getting to the place where I learned to use my voice and I learned to say like, I need help with this. I can't manage all of this. Like that was a huge first step in things. But getting to the place now where he's like, what do you need from me today? How can I show up for you? I melt when I have that experience. And I think there's a little bit of a space where some women in the church are still in that space of like learning that it's okay that they can ask, and what does that feel like, and how do you start asking for those things and recognizing that, oh, I do need help, and oh, I don't have to do all of this, and what does that look like? And like there's a whole process for that. But I feel like as we're starting to have more awareness from men coming into this space, like if you really want to make a woman feel loved, like ask her. Like she'll tell you what she needs. So, and I kind of, the second part of that is I found, there's a few women in my ward that I know I can always go to and talk to, and whatever challenge or thing that's coming up. And one of them, she has spouse, her husband, is in the bishopric. And so there's also this piece of like, oh, I know I can talk to her. Maybe she could talk to him about something. But I've realized there's this craving of like, I would love, like, sorry, my brain works in lots of tangents, but the tangent that is here is it makes me think of, I can't remember if it was a general conference talk or what, but somebody was talking about like the grandpa of the ward, and like that was their unofficial calling, is like, I'm calling you to be the grandpa in the ward, to just like love everybody and to have fun and to greet them and to be there. And I'm like, I want somebody in the ward, a male that I could like go to and be like, this is really hard for me. I'm struggling with this. I wish I could say this. I want to be able to this. And even if that person, like, maybe they're not in the calling and they can't actually make any of the decisions for it, right? Or they maybe it don't even need to go and actually make something happen. Like, just knowing, the same way I have my girlfriends in the ward that I can go and talk to, and I have my spouse that I can talk to, just another layer of like, there's men in my ward that I can go and talk to about this. That is another place that just makes me feel like, oh, I could melt. There's more space just to even be talking about these ideas outside of, of course, holding that space for women when you are on the council or doing different things. That's like the new awareness I've had, is like, oh, I just want that.
I think that's really beautiful and really important. And, I think that that's another thing that men are sometimes wary of, is offering, validation for, this struggle that we have as women when we don't have a place in the hierarchical structure in the same way that men do. And I think it's a beautiful gift when men are able to say, yeah, let's name the things, let's be honest about the things, and let's hear the things that you are experiencing, and let's validate, right? And I think that's something we can all offer each other, is validation, including validation of people who I feel like have totally different experiences than I do at church, right? Other women who will come to me and say, like, oh, well, I've never felt that way. And I can validate that. I know that is an experience that many women have that is different than mine. And I hope that in my validating of their experiences, that they can also offer some grace for mine. Yeah. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it doesn't. Yes. But sometimes that does happen. And so I think that is really important for all members of the church, and for men to be able to say, just take a step back and say, oh yeah, I can see how that's different, right? I may not be able to empathize, because I will never be in your shoes, but I can look at it and sympathize with you. And also, I can see how that would be a different experience than mine.
Yeah, absolutely. Important. And I think there's, it's almost like I'm saying 4 different levels of healing in a way, where it's like there's healing that you do on the individual level with yourself and your own experience. And then there's healing that can come as a woman with other women, like validating that experience, seeing it, holding space for that. There's healing that can come as I have that connection with God and like experience that healing there in this divine space. And there's healing that I feel like can happen of like having men validate that as well. Like there's another layer of healing that comes there. And I think all of those lead to the eventual healing that I think we'll see on a bigger picture of that like system. Yeah. Whatever that looks like, whenever it happens, I don't know. But like, that's my hope and goal. And I feel like this is another piece of that, is just having some of those interactions and setting up that space of like, if you just need to talk, there's something different about having a woman validate your experience and having a man validate that experience and you validating it. And I think all 3 of them have a different role and a different purpose. And we don't want to be limiting or outsourcing one or the other, but to recognize like all of them are there. And some of my greatest experiences have been from friends who were males who could hold that space and acknowledge that. And I have loved in turn being able to, like I recently was a part of the Divine Feminine Summit that happened in January. And it was so fun to be able to like express I think a lot of terms of like masculine and feminine energy, not just like men and women. And so
Yeah.
I was speaking of like how wonderful it was to have somebody, Enoch Sears, who was involved in that, show up, and like the masculine role that he played in the masculine energy of like, he had a team of people who was helping with all of like the technical back end and some of the like financial support of getting things running and going. And having been from a space where I had tried to create a vision like that similarly and do it on my own. And it was so beautiful for me to be able to like appreciate that masculine support and energy showing up and to express that to him in turn of like, thank you so much for offering that and for providing it and being in that space. And I could see it meant something to him too, of like, oh, I feel so appreciative of being acknowledged and having that feeling. And so just having those moments of connection wherever we can find them, wherever they show up, I think really does a lot more than we sometimes give it credit. That it feels like, oh, it was just a little word, or oh, it was just a little phrase, or I just talked with them for a minute. But that to me is like, that's some of the hardest work, is when you can see somebody hold that space, validate those experiences, have the differences, have the conversation, have the connection. That's where I found a lot of the biggest, most meaningful experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you're saying is so important and so beautiful. It's that we need each other, right? And I think that that imagery that you were offering before of the body of Christ, which is something that I often think of, and imagery that I really really identify with, is that the body of Christ is full because of all the different things that we bring to it, right? And the different energies and the different, the masculine, the feminine, all of that range, right? The matriarchal, the patriarchal, all of that range, and all of the talents and the gifts. And we need each other. And we also, and really, like, in that needing of each other is where we find God.
Yeah.
Right? And I really do believe that the reason that we have those two commandments is to love God and love our neighbor, and how interconnected those are is because it's through our neighbor that we learn to love God. And that we really can lean into the relationship that we have with heavenly parents and understand how much we are loved and how much every single child of God is loved. It's in that togetherness, in that needfulness of each other, right? In that seeking of belonging that we do with each other, right? Like, that's, to me, where I find God the most. And so I think it's really important, like, all those things, like that balance, that's so much part of it. It's just like, the needing of each other and the togetherness, that's where the spirit is, right? That's where we find deep connection with deity. So, yeah.
Oh, beautiful. I love that so much. I could talk with you all day, Amy. This has been so fun. I want to acknowledge your time, though, and the time of everyone here. So kind of wrap it up. But if there's any other last thoughts or things you want to share, or anything going on in your world you want to let people know about.
No, just thanks so much for all the work that you're doing and for all of your endeavors and for this time. I really appreciate it. And for all the people that kind of opted in and out. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. This was super fun.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you. I just want everyone to know, like, if you weren't able to watch the whole conversation, sometimes it's harder on Instagram to watch these longer ones. So that's part of why I do it on YouTube as well, is that you can go back and listen to it on YouTube and pause and double time and all the things. So just an acknowledgement for anyone who wants to hear the whole conversation. If you head to my bio, there's a link to my YouTube channel where you can find this conversation. I'll share the link with you too for anyone who wants it. And then I also love to let people know too, one of the things I'm passionate about doing is helping women understand councils better. And whole other conversation, we could go into that. I love that, like, another time, but I love that the church is having us in Relief Society now do this idea of like counseling together as women first before we do our lessons. But I found a lot of people like struggling of how do you make that different from your lesson? And it just kind of feels like it's the same thing. And I don't feel like it's has a purpose or a role. And so to me, I've come to love learning kind of that matriarchal role of councils and what does that look like and how to hold them in church and outside of church, and really understanding kind of what I view as this feminine type of leadership, and that it's different than kind of the meetings with agendas and roles and here's what we're trying to get done. There's this feminine way of kind of being in connection and learning to let the spirit guide and counsel with each other. And so I've created a free guide for anyone who is interested in learning about how to do that. And so I'll be sharing that link as well for anyone who wants to kind of explore that space and find those co-creative, creative spaces. So just wanted to let anyone know that's there too.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. This was great.
You bet. Thank you again, Amy. Keep up the awesome work. We'll be in touch.
Thanks.
And I love
You
it.
too.
So it was so fun. Have a great rest
Bye,
of the
Emily.
day. Bye. All right. Hey, YouTube. So fun to see you here. Hopefully you were able to hear everything there. It was wonderful getting to talk with Amy. And like I said, if you want, you can go follow her at Women on the Stand. She's always up to date on great conversations, the latest LDS news and women and all things there. And yeah, like I said, I'll be sharing the link for anyone who's interested in that guide on women's councils. So I'll talk to you more then. Have a wonderful day.